Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grawney Whale. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside. Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore or mythology, we retell it and have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan and I am your host and your Fireside Bard. You are very welcome along to episode number 23 of Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. I'm coming to you again from the beautiful surroundings of the Head Stuff Podcast Network studio here in Dublin. I'm delighted to be here with you again today. If it is your first time listening to the podcast, you are very welcome along. This could be a good introductory episode. This is a folktale that you don't need to have any context for. But if you do enjoy this episode, please do go back to the beginning and listen to all that we've been building up over the past few months and see if you like it. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for your continued support. You're always welcome back. And I hope you're enjoying seeing and listening to this podcast grow, as I hope it is, as I feel it is. And if you extra enjoy the podcast, you can always contact me at Instagram at OlahanSolo, all one word, OLOHANSOLO. Or if you want to support the podcast, we're trying to take this podcast live. You can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/Fireside Podcast. That is the plug out of the way. Smash that like button. We have a very interesting tale today that I've wanted to do for a couple of months now. It has a beautiful background. It's quite unique in terms of source for this podcast, which is great. And I had some reservations. Reservations probably a strong word about telling this story for reasons I'll talk about afterwards. But I'll let you hear the story first without any context, and then I'll talk about it afterwards. But it's a folktale from the County of Limerick, which is where my grandmother was from, and is a place very dear to me. And also because I am an enormous fan of the Rubber Bandits, and the Blind Boy podcast is a huge influence on me and on this podcast itself. So it gives me great pleasure to be bringing you a folktale from Limerick City as well. So this is Danno or the Devil on Fireside. Danno or the Devil. Once there was a young girl named Maggie Brown. Maggie lived in the townland of Killalea in Limerick City. She was the eldest girl of a very large family, and when both of her parents died, it was up to Maggie to look after the rest. While still only a girl herself, Maggie had to go out and find a job to provide for her bereaved brothers and sisters. Luck came when Maggie found work in a tobacco factory in the city centre. Maggie was grateful for the job, but it entailed an arduous walk every morning and evening to the factory. In fact, it would often be pitch black on her walk home. One winter evening, Maggie was walking home late at night. Her friend Fran was keeping her company on the long, cold walk home. Fran worked in the tobacco factory too, and was also from Killalea, so the two would walk to and from the factory every day and night. It was after 11 o'clock when Killalea finally came into view. The girls were walking and chatting when they heard a voice from the darkness. Hello, girls. Maggie and Fran both jumped with fright and quickly turned to see where the voice had come from. "Ah, girls, I'm over here." They looked into the wood beside the road, and when they looked hard enough, they could make out the shape of a little old woman sitting on a tree stump. The two girls knew that stump. It was rumoured to be a place of bad luck. A fairy tree that had been chopped down by a reckless man whose family was cursed thereafter. Not wishing to soak up any further ill will by association, the stump was best avoided at all costs. But more so than the stump, the two girls recognised the old woman sitting on it. It was Mammy Delahunty. Mammy Delahunty was the oldest woman in Killalea. Indeed, Maggie and Fran thought her to be the oldest woman in the world. Despite being well into her 90s, Mammy Delahunty was very much the matriarch of her home. She still cared for her children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. She was the wisest in not only her house, but in the whole townland, and was still active all throughout the community. Many believed she even had healer's hands, and would seek her advice for a whole range of ailments, long before they would seek the help of doctors. What's more, Mammy Delahunty never asked for anything in return. She did it all for free, for the good of the Limerick community she loved so well. Even when people would try and give her gifts for Christmas as a way of saying thank you, the gifts would nearly always be passed on to those whom Mammy Delahunty thought needed them more. An out-and-out, absolute legend of a woman. "Mammy Delahunty, what are you doing out here so late on your own?" said Maggie. The old woman had let her hair down and was wrapped up warm, but it was a bitter midwinter night, far too cold for a woman of her age to be sitting alone in the woods. "I tell you, girls, I woke up this morning and not one member of my family was speaking to me. I know I'm old, but I will not tolerate being ignored. So I put on my coat and walked out the door. I wanted to visit some friends and to give out about my ungrateful family, but every person I spoke to on the street, visiting the shops, they ignored me too. All I've done for this community, I've never asked for anything back, but I must have done something very bad to warrant this." Maggie and Franny were confused by Mammy Delahunty's account, but felt sorry for the old woman. They both looked at each other and were in agreement that they should take the old woman home. Each taking an arm, Fran said, "Come on now, Mammy Delahunty, we'll take you home and teach that family of yours to respect you." "Oh, I don't think so." A deep, booming voice came from the darkness. It was a voice unlike anything the girls had heard before. They backed away from the old woman to see a tall shape emerging from the shadows. It was a tall, slender man wearing a dark and shabby three-piece suit. He put his two long and bony hands on Mammy Delahunty's shoulders. "Thank you, girls, but that won't be necessary." "This is Danno," said the old woman. "He's a fine gentleman who's been the only one who's talked to me all day." "Indeed," said Danno. "Mrs. Delahunty is in my care now, and I can assure you she will be well looked after. Now run along home, girls. It's getting close to midnight." Maggie and Fran were terrified of this emerging figure. There was something unnatural about him. He was too tall, his features too elongated. He didn't look quite human. "What are you?" Maggie asked Danno. "Mind your manners, Maggie Brown," said Mammy Delahunty. "Danno is a dear friend, and he's going to take me to a place where I'll be safe and appreciated. Isn't that right, Danno?" "Oh, yes, Mrs. Delahunty. It's a beautiful place, with all the scenery and culture of Ireland, but with the warm weather of a tropical foreign land." "Oh, that does sound lovely," said the old woman. "And where exactly is this paradise?" asked Fran. "That's not for you children to know. Now run along. I'm not going to tell you again." "But Mammy Delahunty," cried Maggie, "you love Limerick. You've dedicated your whole life to Killalea." You're right, Maggie, I have. And yet still all the locals are ignoring me, even my own family. It must be time to move on. Yes, your family don't want you anymore, Mrs. Delahunty, but don't worry, I'll look after you, I promise. Then Maggie, finding courage she didn't even realize she had, asked, Tell me, Danno, are you the devil? Danno threw his head back and let out a laugh that was practically satanic, all but confirming Maggie's question. Am I the devil? No, child. If there is a devil, I don't think he would do the work that I do. If you must know, I'm one of the Aes-She. The what? The fairies, said Fran. The good people, corrected Mammy Delahunty. Yes, Mrs. Delahunty, the good people. And we are the good people. Every so often I am tasked with visiting your world and selecting one lucky candidate to join our ranks. Become one of us. We assign a hefty task, but the rewards are endless. And what task is that? Asked Fran. I know, said Maggie. He wants to turn Mammy Delahunty into a banshee. Fran was stunned, but neither Danno nor the old woman seemed to react. Mammy Delahunty seemed to already know this. You're correct, child. Perhaps you're not as stupid as you look. Please, sir, said Fran, don't take her. Mammy Delahunty is too important to kill a Lee. Girl, the two of ye took me for the devil. You consider my assignment an evil one, when it is us who are trying to do good. I am very much aware of Mrs. Delahunty's talents. Indeed, she is one of the most promising recruits I have found in many years. She will be our herald of death. She will warn of the spectre of death being on its way. Without the banshee, people may never get their affairs in order before their often untimely deaths. The banshee provides a great service, and in return for her work, Mrs. Delahunty will become immortal, and she'll live with us in the other world. This is not up for discussion, children. Once midnight strikes, the deed is done. Maggie looked at her watch. It was 10 minutes to 12. Danno leaned over the old woman. You just sit there, Mrs. Delahunty. It will all be over soon. Maggie and Fran looked at each other. They realized that as long as Mammy Delahunty was seated on that stump, the transformation was guaranteed. Without saying a word to each other, the two girls began to shout and lunge themselves at Danno. They grabbed his long, thin arms and attempted to pry his bony fingers off Mrs. Delahunty's shoulders, but the creature's grip was too strong. The girls tried to punch Danno's sides and leapt up in an attempt to scratch his face, but nothing had any effect. If anything, the fairy seemed to be enjoying it. In a last-ditch attempt, Maggie began to pinch Danno. To her surprise, the she flinched. It was possible to harm him. The two girls began to pinch every part of his arms and hands. Then an emboldened Fran began to bite. This enraged the creature. He released his grip of the old woman's shoulders and stretched his arm out and grabbed each girl by the neck. I warned you both not to interfere with my work. Now it'll be the two of you who die tonight. Pity there wasn't a banshee here to warn you. Danno's long, dry, and cold fingers tightened their grasp around Maggie and Fran's throats. The girls thrashed and kicked, but to no avail. They felt the life begin to go from them when they heard another voice. Danno, unhand those children. Danno released his grip, and the two girls fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The voice had come from the vision of a beautiful young woman, in bright floral patterned clothes and a green aura all around her. Her hair was long, blonde, with flowers throughout. She also looked not quite of this world. What are you doing here? Never mind that, the woman said. You are to return to our world. You shall not harm these girls or take this old woman. Danno was outraged. I am fulfilling the task I was given. We need a new recruit. We will have a new recruit, but not like this. Not this woman. You will apologize for the harm you have caused and return to our world. Danno had nothing more to say. He physically could not apologize, but merely turned to Maggie and Fran and ever so slightly bowed. And then Danno was gone. Maggie and Fran ran to the old woman. "Mammy Delahunty, we're going to take you home." "Dear child," replied the old woman, "I am going home." And with that, Mammy Delahunty herself disappeared. The girls were distraught. "We were too late," cried Fran. "She's going to be a banshee after all." "Oh no," said the young woman who had saved them. "Mrs. Delahunty isn't going to become a banshee, but neither will you see her walking the streets of Killalea again. Just trust in the fact that she is safe. Now run home, girls. The hour is late." Maggie and Fran didn't need to be told again. They picked themselves up and sprinted home. Despite the witching hour, when the girls made it back to Killalea, there was a huge crowd gathered in the centre of the community. The girls went to see what the commotion was. The whole crowd seemed to be centred around the Delahunty home. The girls made their way through the crowd into the house to discover lying on the table the body of Mammy Delahunty. A bottle of whiskey at her feet, a barrel of porter at her head, and a big smile on her face. The end. And that is the story of Danno, or the Devil, on Fireside. I hope you enjoyed it. The story behind the story. This folktale comes from a book that was quite a recent edition. I got it over Christmas. It was a Christmas present from my brother. And I've only used one other story from it so far for a couple of reasons. The book is called Gothic Fairy Stories from Ireland, and it has a different story from every county. So it has 32 stories, and it is collected by a husband and wife team, Paula Flynn Lally and Steve Lally. It's very recently published. I think it only came out last year, and I had seen it in shops, and my older brother bought it for me, and I've been making my way through it. I've read most of the stories in it. There's some great tales in it. The one other story I've used from it so far is the Tobacco Quest, which is one of my favourite stories I've done on this podcast, and was great. It was a real odyssey that those who have listened to the podcast before and know the story I'm talking about, you will remember it and hope you enjoyed it. This, when I picked the Tobacco Quest out, this was the other big story. There's two sides to my family. My mother's side, her father was from Cork and her mother was from Limerick. So Cork and Limerick have always had very strong places in my heart. And the Tobacco Quest was a tale from Cork, and this was a tale from Limerick. So it means a lot to me to be able to draw stories from my family's past as well, or from where my family were from at the very least. In fact, probably one of the things that initially drew this to me is that my grandmother, who did grow up in Limerick City, she was the eldest of a large family, and she did have to mind her family growing up. So I think Maggie in the story did remind me of the stories I've heard about my grandmother when she was younger, growing up in Limerick. But this story, so as I said, Paul Flynn Lally and Steve Lally, who collected this book together, they have various different styles in which the stories are told. Sometimes they are dictated, basically, like they will have met an old storyteller who will talk almost there's ones told in the third person, in the first person, various different ways and various different stories. Some, in fact, the tale from Wicklow is a dialogue between a husband and wife of a time they saw a fairy, which is very interesting. But what's kind of unique about this story is there's beautiful artwork done throughout. this book, and you don't have to look any further than if you see the cover of it in a bookshop, you'll notice it's a black and white cover with Irish Gothic fairy stories in green writing, but with this beautiful illustration of a horse on the front. It really stands out. And all the artwork is by an artist named James Patrick Ryan, who was a college friend, I believe, of Steve Lally, one of the authors. And this is one of his stories. This is a tale that his grandmother told him. So this is as close to a new folktale or basically a true story that I've yet encountered. So that was initially why I was hesitant almost to do this as a tale, because I felt like I would have to stick to it more, stick to the facts of it more, and stray from the path a bit less, because it felt more recent, so it felt like I'd be doing a disservice. I felt like if James Patrick Ryan did listen to this podcast, that he wouldn't like if I made my own version of it. But at the same time, this was put into a book of folklore, and like they're very clear on the intent of folklore, as I am, in terms of that folklore is about being passed down and being changed and made into own versions. Now, I have stuck to a lot of the bones, certainly, of James's version. He speaks to it in the first person, that he says, this was my nana and my nana said this. So I've obviously made it more of a narrator point of view, and barring a few details here and there, like I'm sure if James does listen to this podcast, he'll go like, well, that wasn't true, that wasn't true. I have definitely taken little bits and just added to make it more real and more my own, but I have stuck to it for the most part. One of the main departures I went from is, the title is called Danno and the Devil, whereas I wanted to make it more vague than that. In the actual story, Danno does work for the devil, and it is the devil that requires a banshee be created, whereas I would prefer to, as I constantly do, to put a divide between the fairies and God and the devil, as much as possible. I think they are separate worlds entirely, and I was always hesitant to do any kind of religious aspect to this, as people will know, and just to have the folklore be the folklore, because it's the amalgamation of Catholicism and fairy folklore in Ireland is one of the most unique things about it, is that, you know, people growing up in, like, as far up as the late 20th century, or maybe there's even some more still alive today, who absolutely believed in God but also believed in the fairies, and they didn't contradict each other at all. And there is something incredibly fascinating about that and quite rich in that. But people know from the American folktales I've been doing recently, the devil has featured quite a bit. And the devil is, as I said, he's just one of the greatest characters of all time. Whether there is or ever has been a devil is regardless. He has been the inspiration. He's so effortlessly cool, and there's so many endless interpretations of him, and there's so many stories involving him and so many cautionary tales, and I'll never shy away from how good a character he is. And heaven and hell have crept in to stories, most significantly in the Three Wishes, but that was very much a part of the story. And there's nothing, I don't see really a massive Catholic or Christian moral lesson there, so I haven't minded the religious in those. It's been other ones that, like the Children of Lear was a big case, where one of the most famous versions of the Children of Lear is that they could get converted to Christianity at the end, which is an ending I do not like, because it is basically that the function of that is just to bridge the gap between myth and religion, whereas I like to keep the myth entirely as itself. I think the story is stronger that way. But so that meant that for this, I had to change it to Danno or the devil. And I liked the idea of it being vague. It's like, where did Mammy Delahunty go at the end? Did she go to heaven? Did she just disappear? That can be up to yourself, rather than it being much clearer in the original version that it was heaven that she went to. Whereas, I don't know if that's a power that the fairies would have. I much prefer the idea that maybe she's just a piece. She didn't become a banshee, which is what we wanted. And speaking of the banshee, this is the first time the banshees cropped her. lovely head up in this podcast, considering that the Banshee is probably the most famous fairy of them all, after the Leprechaun, he who shall not be named. And there was always going to be a few Banshee folktales on this, and I've read plenty and I have plenty planned. And it's very interesting that this should be the first one, and it's almost a Banshee origin story. It's the only story I've ever heard of the creation of a Banshee, and it's not a character that I would know a huge amount, despite having the absolute shite scared out of me by Darby O'Gill and The Little People as a film when I was younger with the Banshee, and that anyone who has seen that film will know how truly horrifying the Banshee is in that. But those who are a fan of this podcast, if you haven't listened to it already, you should listen to the podcast Sexy Beasts. It's also on the Head Stuff Podcast Network. It's by two incredibly funny lads, Tony Cantwell and Mark Jago. It is on the Head Stuff Podcast Network, so it is a bit of a shameless plug, but I don't know either of the guys. I'm just a huge fan of both of them, particularly Tony, because Tony is a stand-up as well. He does videos that are truly hilarious. Very just objectively funny guy. But they do a podcast where they take different beast cryptids, as they call them, a different monster every week, and talk about it and rate it on a scale of how they would compete against each other in a battle royale, so to speak. And they do a brilliant episode on the Banshee, which has a lot more about the history and the different versions of the Banshee throughout folklore. So if you would like to learn more about the Banshee properly, more than I would know to say, certainly at the moment, then absolutely check out that. But if we do have more stories that centre around her as a character, then I'm sure I will brush up my Banshee knowledge. But ultimately, for those who aren't familiar, the Banshee is a herald of death, basically, like Danno said in the story. It was, if you saw a Banshee, if you heard her wailing or keening, she would usually be by a river combing her hair. But if you heard that, it meant that someone was going to die. I'm not sure if it was necessarily always you, if it was only you that could hear it. But in Darby O'Gill and The Little People, the Banshee is heard, and then death arrives in a horse-drawn carriage, which was, to be fair, if you were going to be carted away, it would love to be in a horse-drawn carriage. But Danno is such a wonderful villain. Like, I love this story. I love this story because it's a good story, simple as. But as I've said, my intent has been to try and find as many as possible female-centered. I had really hoped when I started this podcast that there would be more female-centered myths and folktales, and I'm aware that like a lot of them have been male-centered, and I've changed one and tried to focus here and the other. Ultimately, I go with the stories that I find in whatever order and put them on. But last week we had The Legend of Sive, which was great to have a female-centered myth, and hopefully there'll be more and more of that. But this was great because this was these two young girls and this old woman, and just a very classic villain. He reminds me an awful lot. There's a conception that I was definitely familiar of, that fairies are these little tiny people. You picture them like pixies, whereas very early on in the podcast, people will remember episode 5, I think it was, the story was called The Man Who Had No Story, about a character named Pat Diver who runs amok of a group of fairies, but they are described very similar to Danno as these tall, slender, elongated lads, long fingers, long heads. Like, they so quickly come into your head, this kind of slender man image that's truly frightening to even describe. And the fact that that was a common description for one of these people, I think, is incredible. And I was just so instantly able to visualize Danno, and I heard his voice so immediately in my head. And it was great to do, and it was great to expand. That's one other thing I added to my version of this story, is I expanded the dialogue. Because I wanted to hear Danno speak more. And also for the girls in Mammy Delahunty, I relish any opportunity to do a Limerick accent. I don't know how good it is, truly. I have, in the pub, been told by people from Limerick that it's solid enough, but I would never presume to know. If you are from Limerick and you listen to this podcast and you were offended by anything I have said previously, I do apologise. But it did give me great pleasure to do a story from Limerick, and to have done the story from Cork as well, and Never the Two Shall Cross. Yeah, the reason I haven't drawn from more stories from this book, from the Irish Gothic Stories book, is I went away. And I wanted to do the American folktales while I was travelling around America. But now that I'm back, I do anticipate that there will be another few stories from this book. There's a huge range of them, which is great. It's a great new source to have. Also, there's a bit of a history to my copy of this book, as I got the version for Christmas, like I said, and I picked out, when I was going to write the Tobacco Quest, I went on a trip to Glasgow to visit my girlfriend who lives over there, and I left the book on the plane, and I had started to write it, but I needed it for the source. I needed it for details as well, and I didn't have it anymore, so I thought I was going to have to change. I wanted to write the episode while I was over there, and I had to come back to record it at the start of the week. But Anna, my girlfriend, she very kindly, she had a Kindle, and she downloaded the Irish Gothic Fairy Stories onto it, and I was able to write from that. And then when I had to go and was writing it in the airport, I had the Kindle app on my phone and wrote it from that. Wrote the Tobacco Quest from that. So there was an adventure, there was a folktale in itself to write that adaptation, and that's why I haven't had version since, because that ebook was on Anna's Kindle, not mine. But before I went away to America, I bought my own Kindle. And I have to say, I was hesitant, like so many readers, to make the switch, but they're just bloody deadly. I'm finding I'm reading faster. The books are cheaper. It's really satisfying to hold. It's way more satisfying to get through than I thought I would. Books aren't as daunting. Like, if anyone, I would consider myself quite a good reader, but like not avid. I mean, I know people who like never stop. I would have gaps of reading, which I always don't like, but I read when I can. I try to do more and more. But those those who are like me will probably understand this, is when you get a really thick book, when you pick it up, it's really daunting. And you really want to get to that halfway point, because that's when you know you're definitely going to stick with a book, when you want to finish it. But if a book is like 500-600 pages long, those first 200-300 pages can sometimes be tough and daunting, and you want to get deep into it. You don't have that problem on the Kindle. You just kind of fly through it, and it's done by percentage, but you don't have to look at that. And I'm enjoying the reading experience that little bit more. And just being able to have a pocket library absolutely wherever I go is brilliant. It is so light. The battery lasts so long. This has been, I really should be getting paid by Amazon for this Kindle plug. But the point was, I got my own Kindle, and I've now downloaded my own version of the Irish Gothic Fairy Stories. That's what I've been drawing all my American folktales from. I had an ebook of that as well. But I've now got the Irish Gothic Fairy Stories back on this, so I can make my way through the rest of it and see what other goodies I can find from it, and have my other sources back as well. It's great to be doing an Irish one again. I loved doing the few American folktales, but it's great to be back doing the proper Paddy tales once more. So next week will be episode 24, will it? My God. We'll be going back to myth. We'll be continuing the Fenian cycle. But I will wrap things up there. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if it was your first time, thank you so much. Continuing listening, thank you so much again. Please do contact me on Instagram at Olahan Solo. Please do support the Patreon page, Fireside Podcast. We want to take this show live. We want to take it into an intimate surrounding, have an evening of song, of story, of tales from this podcast, of new tales. We'll see what it can be, but what we need is your support. So please, if you can contribute any small amount even to the Patreon page, or don't, continue to listen to this for free. That is also great. There's very little I've taken as much pleasure in as doing this podcast, in writing and recording them every week. It's been great, and I love it so much, and that's really nice. It's really great that I can feel I get something out of it as well, as I hope you do too. So thank you as always to the people at Headstuff, and thank you to Jamie, my producer, for continuing to edit this and make it sound lovely, and thank you all for listening, and I will see you will hear me next time by the fireside. Goodbye.
This podcast is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.